אנו מכריזים בזאת
Welcome to The View from Israel.
Thanks for having me, Barry. It's good to be with you today, sir.
So sorry to hear about the passing of Dr. Lydia Michel in South Africa. Lydia was the wife of Reverend Kenneth Michel, who has been a courageous and rare voice for truth in South Africa as a member of the South African Parliament, who did so much for the good fight as a Christian Zionist against the hateful lies that perpetrated against Israel there. My heart goes out to you and to your daughter, Olga in particular, for their loss. I met Lydia some years ago in Tel Aviv, and I found her a most lovely and gracious person. So sad to hear about it.
Thank you. We appreciate that, Barry. My Olga and my son, of course, those who don't know, Olga married our son, so she's my daughter-in-law. They are in South Africa now, of course. The services are scheduled for later this week. We weren't able to join them, but yes, we appreciate everyone's prayers and your well wishes. As a matter of fact, as you know, Barry, Lydia Mishwe was also a parliament member, so her funeral will be something of a state event as well, as the state is recognizing her service both to not just South Africa, but globally in women's affairs and all those types of things. So we're honored that they are doing that, and but our hearts are heavy that she's no longer with us here.
I know she was also very staunch Zionist as well, and we appreciate that in Israel as well. You wrote an article about 7-8 years ago, which reflected actually what I felt. It was 7 reasons why the Palestinian crisis and the Black struggle for freedom are absolutely nothing alike. And I realized by that I had a kindred spirit in you. Explain to me and explain to the viewers, if you could recall that article, what you wrote and what you meant in that piece.
So I don't remember every one of the 7, but I've commented on them for quite a while over the years since you've seen that article. Of course, I wrote the 2nd edition of my book, Zionism and the Black Church, in which I discuss those things as well. But essentially, some of the main differences when it comes to Israel's detractors attempting to draw parallels between the plight of the Palestinians and what Black Americans or Black South Africans went through in terms of apartheid, Jim Crow, is that bottom line, it is the Palestinian leaders themselves who are the Jim Crow, quote unquote, or the apartheid, quote unquote, if you want to use those terms. I don't recommend it. But what you have is the Palestinian leaders, whether it's the Hamas in Gaza, whether it's the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, those are the entities that are oppressing their own people. Israel's enemies will blame their oppression on Israel, but unfortunately, it's a gross distortion of what's going on the ground. I also talked about the fact that in the fight for freedom, the civil rights struggle particularly, what Dr. King championed as a nonviolent struggle, one of the comments I made in that article is that it would have never dawned on any Black leaders to put bombs on their young people or to put guns in the hands of 10, 11, 12-year-olds and then march them to the front of the line. And somehow the way the Yasser Arafat's mind worked, as you know, Barry, to put Arab children in harm's way on purpose so that if something were to happen to them, he could then blame the state of Israel. That is a mindset that was far beyond, would not have even beyond the pale, right? There's something that our leaders never would have done, never did do. The terrorism that is a part of the Palestinian leaders, Hamas's declaration that Israel will exist until Islam obliterates it, and all of these things had nothing to do with some sort of civil rights movement. And it was, again, a very cynical plot on the part of the Palestinian leaders, particularly Yasser Arafat and the PLO, who was backed by the KGB, to then exploit that struggle for freedom, what I call the legitimate fight for justice here in the States, particularly in the South Africa, and try to make it some sort of terrorist plot that's actually going on where the leaders are concerned now. Those two things have nothing to do with each other, though there's been the attempt to connect those things. And the bottom line of it is also that it's offensive to connect those two things together for those who truly understand historical context and truly understand who is oppressing the Palestinian people.
It's funny you should say this, Dumisani, because two things. First of all, you mentioned about some teenagers who were inspired or incited to take up arms against Jews and kill them. We had a perfect or imperfect example of that just last Saturday on the Jerusalem Sabbat, in which even a 13-year-old Palestinian boy was incited sufficiently to take a gun and open fire on Jews going to pray. Talk to me also, going back in time, about the teachings of Martin Luther King, because it does seem to me, and we'll get to it in the show, that since the inspirational message of Martin Luther King in America, the monologue seems to have taken a far darker path. Talk to me about the inspiration and the teachings of Martin Luther King.
In my book, chapter 4 deals specifically, we've written other things on it as well, but specifically in the book, Zionism and the Black Church, chapter 4 is dedicated to, the title of the book is, the title of the chapter is The Pro-Israel Legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in the book, we cite not just quotes of his supporting Israel, but we try to give a broader context in terms of his fight against anti-Semitism. He saw it as a fight against injustice. As he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. His fight for the right for Israel to exist, to defend itself, to have secure borders. Those things, again, he saw those as issues of justice. He was not obviously in any way against the Arab population. He felt that they also needed to be tended to. He talked about it in one of the statements that he made to the Rabbinical Assembly 10 days before he was killed. He said the Arab population, which much of it is steeped in poverty, a lack of education, lack of resources. He was saying there needs to be, he even called it a Marshall Plan, his words, a Marshall Plan, where we lift up those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder and bring them to the mainstream of economic security. So he expressed concern for the entire region, but he did so through first and foremost standing on the foundation of defending the Jewish state to be a Jewish state and to defend itself against its enemies, which is why he called it an oasis of brotherhood and democracy. This was his stance. It was controversial even then because he made his most prolific statements in favor of Israel after the '67 war. Many of Israel's detractors will point to Dr. King's support for Israel until the Six-Day War, but that is simply, not only is it not true, he doubled down on Israel's right to defend itself after the '67 war, almost a year after the '67 war. And for those who say that that was then, this is now, well, even after Dr. King had died, his family and close friends started a Black Zionist organization in 1975 called BASIC. And I include that in the article, the BASIC, in my book as well. BASIC is an acronym for Black Americans to Support Israel Committee. And so it was started by Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph to support the state of Israel, and again, also to defend the historic Black struggle for freedom. So what you allude to, Barry, is what's happened over the 50+ years since Dr. King's death, the 40+ years since that time, and obviously in the 70s, where you have these Black voices in favor of Israel. You still have Black support for Israel in the United States. It's not as vocal as it was. And what you're talking about here now in terms of Dr. King's approach being somewhat almost thwarted today, what you have in the States, as we've been sharing with others across the country, there are levels of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in the States that we've not seen, by the experts' account, since the Second World War. So not just in terms of the Black community, but as a nation, unfortunately, we are seeing a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in anti-Israel sentiment, spurred on much by our college campuses, what's going on there. And even when it comes to the legacy of Dr. King, whether it was the nonviolent struggle for freedom or whether it was his standing with Israel, these are the types of things that are being inverted in the public, very public social justice discourse in our nation and in the West that somehow, if you are a true person of justice, invertedly, you are now anti-Zionist, right? You are against Israel. And why? Because you are against Israel's, quote, treatment of the Palestinians. Right back to that issue there. No discussion of Islamic Jihad, no discussion of the Palestinian Authority, no discussion of Hamas, simply Israel. Israel is the reason why the people of Gaza are living under a brutal dictator of Hamas, right? I know it's completely doesn't make any logical sense, but these are the types of things that are being said. These are the very things that Dr. King was pushing against when it came to defending Israel and also expressing concern for the Arab population. His mantra, his mindset, and the mindset of much of the civil rights community, that has what has been attacked and unfortunately exists now. Again, I'll double down, especially on our college campuses where Israel is being attacked and vilified across the country all the time, from semester to semester. These students, both pro-Israel and Jewish, are experiencing it. Some of them are feeling very unsafe in terms of the atmosphere that's there. This is a very volatile time that we're in right now.
You correct me if I'm wrong, but Martin Luther King was strongly supported in his civil rights movement by Jewish rabbis and the leaders of the Jewish communities. Tell us something about that, but on the other hand, continue the conversation that to me, it seems that the Black communities have come under a very negative shadow of other people, ranging from the Farrakhan's to the Ilhan Omars to even Kanye West, who are shedding massive incitement against Jews. How has America gone from the enlightened message of Martin Luther King to the darkness of people like Kanye West and people like Farrakhan?
There's really no two ways about it, Barry. What you have, probably more than any other single factor that has, in a sense, on the campuses and beyond, begun to radicalize our young people and take over the discourse when it comes to media and social media, is what we talk about in our organization, right? We're a nonpartisan organization, but we make no bones. There's a far left, what's often termed as progressive ideology, that basically states in this whole binary world, there are two people, good and bad, power and the powerless, the powerful, the powerless. White equals good, black equals bad, or white equals bad, black equals good. This whole power structure, this whole oppressor narrative, right? The way that you distill even difficult issues of history into this whole binary narrative. This is where we are now. And in that narrative, Israelis or Jews are bad. Palestinians, Arab Palestinians, or people of color, right? Somehow Jews have been transformed into white people, right? It doesn't matter what color the Jewish person is. They can be darker skin, lighter skin, doesn't matter. A Jew or a person who supports Israel, a Zionist, is white, therefore bad. An Arab Palestinian is brown, therefore good. And for those who are thinking I'm speaking just gibberish and like first grade type, that's exactly what's happening on our campuses here. Everything from critical race theory to the ideology of Black Lives Matter, right? Black Lives Matter, its organization, which was supposed to be about fighting the injustices on the streets against police brutality. It launches immediately into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, having nothing to do with Ferguson or Chicago or Los Angeles. So this is what has happened, Gary. That's this narrative, Barry. It has been the narrative has been captured by this false narrative, if you will, right? This rhetoric of just extremist. Here's what's good. Here's what's bad. Zionist equals bad. Palestine equals good. Again, this is why just a few years ago, you used to hear about Israel withdrawing to the 1967 lines, right? We don't even hear about that anymore. We just hear from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. We want all of it. Intifada, intifada. That has been rubber stamped as justice. Hence, Ilhan Omar gets to say those things. Rashida Tlaib gets to say these types of anti-Semitic, anti-Israel things. And these are congresswomen in the House, right? They're able to say these from their Twitter accounts. They're able to say these things from the House floor. Rashida Tlaib was just on the House floor the other day declaring Israel as an apartheid state. That is a lie, but it's been repeated for so much that people can say it even in our Congress, in the halls of Congress, and it has more and more credibility because somehow that's justice speak, which it is nothing of the kind. You referred to Barry the issue of the Jewish people, Jewish support in the civil rights movement. I would even submit to you, long before the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, right? You had Jewish involvement in what we often call Black liberation a generation before. You can go back to the early 1900s when Julius Rosenwald of Sears Roebuck fame and Booker T. Washington, the entrepreneur and educator, come together and begin to, in their collaboration, build what we affectionately now today call Rosenwald schools, right? Rosenwald and Washington, that direct connection only lasted about 3 years because Washington passes away in 1915. They started in 1912, but still that synergy continues on. And because of Rosenwald's efforts, some 5,400 schools built throughout the segregated South for Black students. Not only that, the Rosenwald Fund also covers the scholarships for those who would go on and study beyond the grade schools, right? Those like Charles Drew, who became the Black doctor who revolutionized how you store blood plasma, or Marian Anderson, the Black opera singer, or Langston Hughes, the poet. But Rosenwald, Julius Rosenwald's fund, actually, they call them Rosenwald Fellows. This was a revolutionary move in early part of the United States to basically save the nation, right? You have millions of Black children who don't have access to education, and it is this Jewish man and this Black leader who come together and essentially change the course of American history. This is before Dr. King was even born. He's not even born until 1929. So by the time you get to the civil rights movement, let's back up some more. The oldest civil rights organization in the world is the NAACP, founded by Jewish and Black Americans. So within the story of Black liberation, you have our Jewish brothers and sisters there every step of the way, right? So by the time you get to the civil rights organization, the civil rights movement, of course, the Jewish people have already been involved. And Dr. King goes on to say that there's no other ethnic group more present in the Negro struggle for justice than the Jew. There's almost a direct quote that he made, again, 10 days before he was assassinated.
This is why your voice is so inspirational and so important. I think we need more of a megaphone of you. But tell me, how did Dumisani Washington become the founder of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel? What was the spark? What is the message? And how do you promote that around America today?
So I started IBSI, and the website is ibsi.org, in the summer of 2013. It was after my first ever trip to Israel in December of 2012. I was part of Christians United for Israel's African American Pastors Tour there in 2012. Hanukkah happened to be, and even in going to Israel, Africa and Israel were already passions of mine in terms of study. Coming up as a Christian, I was always fascinated by all things Israelite. I tell people all the time, I read the Old Testament more than the New Testament, fascinated by the stories of the patriarchs and the prophets and all of those things. So that was always something that was deep in me. In terms of a Black spiritual Zionism, many of the Negro spirituals and songs and gospel songs were often had Zion themes, right? Moses themes, deliverance themes. So this was nothing unique to my upbringing, but this was something that was always part of my heart, part of my mind. There in Jerusalem, praying at the Western Wall, I have an overwhelming sense to take those passions and strengthen the solidarity both between Africa and Israel and the Black and Jewish communities, right? There's always been a strong Africa component to the work of IBSI. So when I came back to the States and began to do research, and later on started the organization, which was also inspired by BASIC, the organization that I referred to earlier, and wrote the book Zionism in the Black Church. I wrote the first edition it was published in 2014. The second one came out in February 2021. This was something that it was a path and a journey for me, both as a pastor, as a Black Christian, that understanding more and more the importance of the synergy, all the good that the Black Jewish synergy has done, like I talked about with the Roosevelt, the Washingtons, the Dr. King and Joshua Heschel, all of those things. We often in our organization, we say that the first Africa-Israel summit was 3,000 years ago when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem, right? There's been this connection there for thousands of years. And for me, starting the organization, just as a response to what I really felt, was to strengthen those ties and the first step of it is education. So what we do, we work throughout the Black community across the country, first and foremost with pastors and Christians, but not just within the religious community. And we share this information. We underscore not just the historical part of the connection between the Black and Jewish communities, but the importance of that connection even right now, right? We do the same thing where Israel and Africa are concerned. This is an amazing time in which there are African nations. They've always been friends with Israel. That's always been played out a little differently when it comes to the United Nations. We may get into that. But there's always been this affinity there from the days of Golda Meir as the first foreign minister who began to travel around Africa, and the Julius Nyerere, who was the president of Tanzania at the time, called her the mother of Africa. All of these things that Israel would do in terms of its cooperation in science and technology and agriculture and all of these things, right? So we've underscored that in education, and what we do, we've launched as our premier move something called the Peace Initiative, and people can go on our website and they'll see it on ibsi.org. Peace is an acronym for Plan for Education, Advocacy, and Community Engagement, where we recruit Black American and African in the United States from across the country. We then enroll them. They take a 16-course study course over a period of time, and they make 2 overseas trips, one to Africa and one to Israel. So December, we went to the motherland. We were in South Africa, as you said. And in June of this year, we'll go to the Holy Land. We say December, the motherland, June, the Holy Land. And Barry, I can tell you the trip that they had to South Africa, and they're seeing the Jewish community involved in South Africans' lives on so many different levels. Even hearing Nelson Mandela talk about the intrinsic value of the Jewish involvement in the anti-apartheid movement, right? It was moving to even hear him talk about how the Jewish people, their help in dismantling and coming against apartheid was so crucial to their success. And then we traveled the country. We'll do the same thing in Israel in June. And each of those, what we call IISS ambassadors, will be the hub of Black Jewish synergy in their cities. We recruited them from cities across the country. This is only our pilot program. We plan on launching the second installment of it this summer, as well as what we call IISS Pastors, a separate track just for Black pastors who will also go through a separate study, more of a theological study. Will also travel to Africa, will also travel to Israel and be IISS pastors, where they will be able to very confidently stand with Israel and share this with both their parishioners and those in their community.
Are you invited to speak at either synagogues or Jewish community centers? And what reception do you get there?
We have been from the beginning of our work. Just so you know, in terms of timeline, I started IBSI in 2013. 2014, joined the staff of Christians United for Israel as their diversity outreach coordinator. Was on staff for almost 7 years. IBSI continued, but under my son's direction. My son Joshua is the executive director. I remained on the board, but returned full-time to IBSI in May of 2021. So yes, from the beginning, we have been embraced by much of the Jewish community and organizations. I've spoken in synagogues. I've spoken with Jewish organizations. I've spoken on campuses as a guest of the pro-Israel Jewish organizations there as well. And the reception is always warm. It's always amenable. There's always a desire to want to work together, to identify areas of work together. As a matter of fact, I'm heading out to Southern California in a couple of days, so I'll be with a couple of Jewish organizations there, speaking with some Black pastors as well. And that has continually been the case. So yes, we've continually identified how we can do this work together, and those Jewish organizations have made their materials and everything available to us for anything that we need as we are working within the Black community.
It must be a strange experience for you as a Black pastor to go into the campuses these days, which is a den of hatred against Jews and specifically against Israel, with your message. Again, what sort of reception? Are they respectful for you, or do you have problems as Jewish speakers or lecturers or even Israelis are finding when they go on campus?
We haven't done as many college events lately as we did earlier on, but I can tell you that through the breadth of it, we've had everything. We've had protesters come in and try to shout us down. There's always security that's there. We've had people stage walkouts. I remember, it's funny, I'll be at UNC Chapel Hill in a few days. It's the first time I've been there since about 8 years. The last time I was there was a gathering, and there was a young lady who people tell me was Linda Sarsour. I didn't know who she was. Staged we had in the auditorium in the middle of my speech. They staged a walkout, that type of thing. So I've seen a gamut, and when I've been there, when it comes to protests, those types of things. What I have also seen, I've had the opportunity, Barry, to engage with students, anti-Israel students, right? In these settings, for those students who would talk and have conversations. And I can tell you, I even talk about one of those anecdotes in my book, Zionism in the Black Church, that in having conversations with them, when we're able to really talk about issues, get beyond the rhetoric of free Palestine and just some Zionist talking points, but just actually talk about the state of Israel, talk about those who are, again, the rulers of the Palestinian people. I found that more often than not, those students are willing to talk. As a matter of fact, Barry, I can say this to your viewers. We began to have such success, not just us as an organization, but others who were employing this same method, being on the campuses and just really having dialogue, especially when you're demonstrating for them that you know who Hamas is, you know that Khaled Mashal was worth $2.6 billion, the former head of Hamas, you know that Mahmoud Abbas is now in the 20th year of his 4-year term. When you're aware of the political situation on the ground, oftentimes those students will be more amenable. They'll listen to you because they know, they see that you are at least aware, right? We found that was so effective. A call went out to Students for Justice in Palestine from their leadership: don't talk to them anymore. So they would say, don't have any conversations with them, don't dialogue with them, don't even debate them, just go there and shout and yell. We knew that much of that was because those students, when they would have real conversations, many of them gave them much to think about. And for some of them, they didn't feel that passionate about their work with Students for Justice in Palestine or the Muslim Student Association anymore. We believe that we started to see a change in their strategy for that reason. So yes, sir, we've seen a gamut of it.
Tell me, if people do want to invite you to talk to audiences, whether it's on campuses or whether it's in synagogues or Jewish community centers, how do make people make contact with you or your organization to invite you to speak there?
The easiest way is for people to go to our website, ibsi.org, and you can click on the contact us there on the website. You'll see that goes to the admin, and they can request speakers, or they can request even more information about what it is that we do. Of course, I speak, as does my son, who's executive director, as does Olga when she has time. She wears different hats as well, but Olga Mashwe. We do speak. We have what's called a speakers bureau, which is another thing our IISS ambassadors some of them will be involved in as well. So go to ibsi.org and find out how you can be a part, and we'd love to be with you. Some of our dates aren't on our website yet. They will be in later on this week because we are scheduled to be in different parts of the country. I'll be in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area later on this spring. I believe in the Dallas area later on this spring. So for those of you in those different areas in the States, you'll be able to see on our calendar pretty soon. If you not having a separate event, you can join us there as well.
How can people get hold of your book, Zionism and the Black Church? It's available on Amazon. Maybe we'll put up a link.
Absolutely. So the best way, again, we direct all our traffic to our website, ibsi.org, and you can click on the book. You'll see the book. If you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see the book on the homepage. It is available. It's available in digital for your Kindle, all your e-readers. It's available in print, of course. And I have a copy of it behind me here. You'll see this copy. And then it's also available in audiobook, right? So if you go on our website there and click on it, it'll take you to the homepage where it's available in all of those ways. So Amazon, even for the audiobook, those of you overseas, I believe it's called Storytel, where you can get it in certain European and Middle Eastern countries as well. So absolutely, it's available in all of those mediums.
Well, the subtitle of your book is, and I have it here, Why Standing with Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. It's an interesting subtitle. But before you explain that one, I want to explain to you, Pastor Washington, I have started to do, in the name of the Israel Institute of Strategic Studies, is to distribute, to send out on a monthly basis, a monthly chronology of the persecution of Christians and the destruction of churches and Christian images around Africa and Asia and other Muslim countries as well on a monthly basis. Because I do this because I'm finding support from Christians in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand, in America, far more passionate quite often than I do with the critical support from Jewish people. So in return, what I'm finding is that when I give people, as a result of research, the list of the persecutions that are going on by the same people who are persecuting the Jews, this strengthens the bond and the commitment between the two traditional faiths. The Judeo-Christian values remain, they're being challenged as well, but also physical persecution is going on. So this is a mutual relationship that you and I will be developing in 2023.
Absolutely. So both of your questions, both the subtitle of the book and then what you just mentioned in terms of the Christian persecution, and I would add to that the enslavement of many Africans in some of those same regions there. Unfortunately, this Islamist-driven slave trade. Those two things go hand in hand. So why standing with Israel will be a defining issue for Christians of color in the 21st century? I chose that as the subtitle, to underscore the urgency of what's happening now. And again, also underscore why there's such an strong Africa component to what we do. As you know, Barry, in the region where Israel's neighborhood is, Christians are free and are actually growing in number. Christians are diminishing in number in those areas in which that's controlled, for example, by the Palestinian Authority. Bethlehem, which had a much larger number of Christians than it does today. Obviously, the Christian population of Gaza is almost nil. Why is that the case? Because you have such a religious oppression happening there, not to mention the Coptic Church in Egypt, right? Not to mention the genocide of Christians that's happening right now in Nigeria. I believe 73,000 plus, or so 43,000 plus that have been killed over the last 12 years or so. This is the reality, right? So the Israel haters who spend time either distracted by the lies or perpetrating the lies of Israel, apartheid and all of those things, not only are those things not true, they are unfortunately unconcerned or distracted by the real oppression that's going on there in the region, whether it's North Africa and other parts of Africa and other parts of the Middle East. So no region is more impacted by the Israel hatred and anti-Zionism than these places that are being impacted by this type of terrorism. In other words, as the United Nations Human Rights Council focuses maniacally on the Jewish state of Israel, coming against Israel, passing all kinds of resolutions against Israel, it is virtually silent on these other atrocities that you and I were just talking about, right? The genocide in Nigeria, the 1 million slaves in Libya, and on and on. The Christian persecution, it ignores those things, virtually ignores those things, right? While it's focused on demonizing the Jewish state. No other people are paying for that type of anti-Semitism, that type of global anti-Semitism more than those in Africa and other parts of the world that are suffering that type of persecution. This is another reason why we say why standing with Israel will be a defining issue of Christians of color in the 21st century, because it is those Christians and those others in the religious minorities in some of these other areas in these regions that are suffering because of the international community's demonization of Israel. Not to mention when we come out in the United States, where we're talking about the types of disinformation in our colleges, the disinformation in our schools. I talk about the fact that one of the examples that I use is our public school system, disinformation like the critical ethnic studies, which is supposed to be ostensibly a study about different contributions to the history of the United States. And it becomes, once again, a demonization of Israel. These kids being told that Israel is an apartheid state, that is committing genocide against the Palestinians, and that somehow that civil rights movement that you and I were talking about, that Dr. King's generation, that they were docile, that they were weak, that somehow because they fought for a nonviolent struggle for change, somehow that made them less than. They weren't real men and women. These types of things are placed into the curriculum of these critical ethnic studies, and these types of things that was born and birthed there in California, and it's being spread across the country. We talk about it. There are different articles. People can go on our website. When you click on ibsi.org, click on Africa Israel Weekly. We have articles. As the young people say, we have all the receipts for everything that I'm talking about here. Who is being disserved by that type of rhetoric and propaganda within the school system? Those students who already have a lack of education, who already have lack of access. I talk about in my book, in 2017, 75% of Black boys in California's public schools could not read at grade level. 75%, right? How in the world is disinformation about Israel helping that reading level and that literacy level increase? It's not, ladies and gentlemen. It's only exacerbating what is already a deficit by telling these kids that somehow Israel is the reason, the Jews are the reason for their problems. The same type of indoctrination that's happening to kids in the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. This is what's happening here. Blame the Jews, blame Israel. Who most needs to have that type of wicked system dismantled? Those people who are being most disturbed by it.
And meanwhile, to echo something you said about Bethlehem, and I keep stressing this point because not many people know about it. When Bethlehem was under Israel's administration, Bethlehem was a middle-class Christian majority town. Most of the businesses in Bethlehem were Christian owned. It was a peaceful town. We were obligated because of the Oslo Accord to hand over Bethlehem to Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority. And what we have today is that Bethlehem has become a vast majority a Muslim town, Islamic town. The Christians have been persecuted. They have been driven out of their homes and their businesses and have fled. And therefore, Bethlehem is no longer, so far as demographics is concerned, a Christian town anymore. And this emphasizes who cares for the Christians and who doesn't. This is one of the facts that needs to be emphasized.
If I could just interject there, absolutely. And because most people are unaware of the fact that Bethlehem is ruled by the Palestinian Authority, because especially for us as Christians, Bethlehem is the town that Jesus was born. So clearly that's Israel. Well, yes and no. Yes, it is a part of historic Israel, but it is under the authority of the Palestinian Authority. And what Israel's enemies do, they use that sleight of hand and say, you see how there's no more Christians hardly in Bethlehem? That means Israel's an apartheid state. See, this is the type of deception that is used to carry people away with this whole Israel as the oppressor narrative. And that's part of the reason, as you already know, Mary, why the education process is so important, because it's very quickly, easily tell a lie. But when you have to unpack that lie, it takes a little bit longer. So the investment of time and, of course, resources has to go there to actually educate in that way.
And on the final note of that, of course, we have to cope with the message of people like Mahmoud Abbas, who claimed that Jesus is a Palestinian messenger. Well, of course, we know that Jesus was a Jew.
Yes.
And coming on to the final point, Martin Luther King made the first African-American pilgrimage to Israel in, I think it was 1967. And this year, we're going to see Dumisani Washington's African-American pilgrimage to Israel this year. Who are you bringing with you, and what's on your agenda here in Israel when you come? I think you said in June.
Well, yes, sir. Well, one quick correction. Dr. King went for the first time to Israel in the 50s with he and his wife. Before Israel obviously had access to Judea and Samaria, they went to Palestine, they went to Jordan. and other parts of Jerusalem that they had access to. But he was planning on a huge tour, which would have happened in November 1967. It was interrupted, of course, by the war. We talk about that in the book as well, his letters back and forth to Ben Gurion and how excited they were about the trip and everything. So I am taking our pilot group this June, the pilot group of our IISS ambassadors, the ones that just went to South Africa. They will now go to Israel. And I stress pilot, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a prototype of the type of advocacy that IISS will do, IBSI. And we were taking these students, about 15 of them, as a test group. Now, they're amazing. I could spend a lot of time just talking about who these men and women are from across the country in the education sector and the business sector and everything. They're amazing, amazing. And we're excited about what's happening, but it is only the beginning of it. What we plan to do is the second installment of about 30 of those IISS ambassadors and another 30 IISS pastors who will make this very similar trek. So yes, we will conclude our pilot program in June. Be there, all my Israeli friends, between the 5th of June to the 15th, going across the land. And what are we seeing? Everything. We're seeing historic Israel, biblical Israel, the modern state of Israel. We're going to try to go to the Technion. We're going to Caesarea. We're going to Jerusalem, of course. Our main partner on the ground is the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Other partners also Combat Anti-Semitism Movement there in Jerusalem. So we'll be connected with them as well. And we'll be having interviews and discussions with Israelis from across the spectrum, right? The Arab Israeli Christians, the Arab Israeli Muslims. We're talking about the Ethiopian Israeli community, the other parts of the Mizrahi community, the Orthodox community. We are going to see Israel as much as we can in about 10 days in all of her glory and splendor, so that they understand and make that connection on the Israel side, right? They're in South Africa. They saw a synergy that I could only, again, we need a separate conversation about all that they saw in South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the Black Jewish Israel-Africa relationship is alive and well in South Africa. The ANC, the African National Congress, notwithstanding, there's the political rhetoric and then there's the reality on the ground. Our ambassador saw the reality on the ground. They were completely blown away. They'll go to Israel and see the rest of that connection throughout the land of Israel, and they're very excited to do it.
Well, two things I want to say in the conclusion to you, Dumisani, because if you're coming and you would like to speak to audiences, do let me know if you have openings there, and I will do my best to arrange it to venues and places and bring an audience to hear your voice, which is inspirational. The other thing that I'm hoping my colleague organization in Jerusalem that's working with you do is have you go to the Knesset and speak directly to members of the Knesset. This ought to be done by the foreign minister or the minister of strategic affairs. But I think your voice in the Israeli Knesset this summer is vital. And I think it's very important that those two things are done. I'd like to leave not so just you, but our viewers with this message. I think one of the things you're getting from this conversation between myself and Pastor Dumisani Washington is that the connection between Jews and Christians around the world is we are experiencing this year in 2023 the same sort of suffering. I put it this way, as somebody had once said it. First, they come for the Saturday people, and then they come for the Sunday people, where there are no longer any Saturday people there. And you see this played out everywhere around the Middle East, from the Palestinians through to African countries where other forms of religion tend to reign or control rather than Christianity. I don't know if you share that feeling.
Absolutely, Barry. When we did my time with Christians United for Israel, we launched what's called the Mizrahi Project, telling the story of the over 850,000 Jews expelled or forced to flee from North Africa and the Middle East, places like Yemen, places like Algeria, of course, places like Egypt, and where the persecution of the Christians happening now in places like Egypt, right? Where is the enslavement happening now? How and why is there such avalanche of persecution against particularly the Christian populations in those other regions now? Well, it's because the Jewish population was driven out, as you said, Barry, and now the focus is on destroying the Christian population because that's not sexy and doesn't sell headlines and it sounds so politically incorrect to people. It's completely ignored by the media. It's almost completely ignored by our State Department. It's like no one wants to deal with it. Our organization is partnering with other organizations. You alluded to one of them, for example, Charles Jacobs. We're working with them, exposing the slave trade that's happening there in the region, as well as the religious persecution. So absolutely, Barry, this is going on. This is after the Jewish population was expelled from the region.
Well, it's been inspiration talking to you, Pastor Dumisani Washington. I hope it's going to be the first of many conversations. Good luck to your ventures, Batzlacha. I think we're brothers in arm and dedication to do with a similar cause. We're fighting the same battles.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barry. Thank you for having me. Enjoy being with you.
Viewers, thank you for joining us. I hope you go to the link, get a copy of Dumisani Washington's book. Be in contact with him if you think you can be help or you need more information. I think you'll find, I hope you found that this recording was inspirational. This is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel, saying shalom from Israel and thank you.
Following its victory in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, the state of Israel was being ideologically attacked. Nowhere was this more evident than in the United Nations. Members of the Arab League, along with the former Soviet Union, crafted UN Resolution 3379, Zionism is Racism. This met great opposition from the Black American community in the form of BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Committee, founded by civil rights leaders Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph. Bayard Rustin wrote about and spoke out on behalf of Israel and for peace in the Arab-Israeli conflict. He also defended the historic Black struggle for justice as he condemned the fraudulent use of the word racism by Israel's enemies. Rustin said, "Zionism is not racism, but the legitimate expression of the Jewish people's self-determination. From our 400-year experience with slavery, segregation, and discrimination, we know that Zionism is not racism." Rustin and Basic did not stop at simply standing with Israel, but standing against Israel's enemies, calling out both Jew hatred as well as the tyranny that ruled over the Arab Palestinian people. Rustin wrote in a New York Times article in 1979 about the Palestine Liberation Organization and its leader Yasser Arafat. Looking back on the history of the PLO, one thing has become abundantly clear. The PLO, from the day of its creation in 1964, has never once uttered a word in support of any form of nonviolent resistance, peaceful relations between Israelis and Palestinians, or a political solution to the complex problems in the Middle East. By contrast, Black leaders in America, especially central figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and A. Philip Randolph, never once in the long history of the civil rights struggle countenanced violence or terrorism. On Sunday, November 23, 1975, Basic published a full-page ad in the New York Times. In the Times, Basic listed 7 tenets explaining its solidarity with Israel and commitment to regional peace. 1. We condemn the anti-Jewish blacklist. 2. We believe Blacks and Jews have common interests in democracy and justice. 3. We support democratic Israel's right to exist. 4. Arab oil prices have had disastrous effects upon Blacks in America and in Africa. 5. We support peace through mutual recognition. 6. We support genuine Palestinian self-determination. And 7. We will work for peace. Basic was endorsed by 200 prominent Black Americans from virtually every facet of society, including Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King Sr., Mrs. Medgar Evers, Andrew Young, David Dinkins, Rosa Parks, Arthur Ashe, and opera star Leontine Price. Essentially, Basic ended after Bayard Rustin's death in 1987. But Black-Jewish solidarity has never ended. Today, Israel continues to be ideologically attacked, and we at the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel continue the legacy of standing with Israel and standing for peace.
synagogue.